He looked over at me and smiled radiantly. "Aw, my little brown incest baby," cooing before bursting into gut-busting laughter. My teeth began to grit and my stomach churned and lit aflame with anger. My innards were boiling and my hands began to clench while his long, pale arm slithered across my shoulders and jostled me while he continued to laugh. He saw the grim set on my lips and furrowed brow and quipped, "What?" It was funny. His laugh simmered down into a smile, and he continued to drive us in his old white Mercedes. How did I end up here? I asked myself. I already knew the answer. I wanted a relationship for years, to have and to hold, to support and love me. What I ended up with was, instead, a racist. Throughout my entire life, I wanted a boyfriend. I had crushes on boys starting in preschool. I was an awkward, chubby child who mumbled and towered menacingly over the other students, clad in pigtails and awful 90s clothes my father picked out. I was to die for, obviously. I measured the years in school by the crushes I held. Kyle in kindergarten was followed by Sergio, Joey, Joe, Eric, Manny, Arthur, Jordy, Eric, Nathan, Daniel, Mike, Caesar, Mark, and Mike again, to name a small selection. I dreamt of being asked to be someone's girlfriend so we could hold hands in school, kiss behind the classrooms, and definitely eventually make sweet, sweet love. Time passed and not much changed. I was always awkwardly tall, unattractively large, nerdy, and although I was fairly popular, no one made moves to make me theirs. I felt like I was missing out on what it meant to be a teenager. The girls around me were getting boyfriends and losing their virginities. It felt like no one wanted me besides a creepy 23-year-old at my job. He made out with me in the towel room of the spa I worked at when I was 17. I was on birth control, damn it. I was ready to go, yet nothing happened. I graduated high school and moved to Orange County to go to university. K through 12 was a bust, but I hoped someone in college would find me attractive. I went with high hopes of finding a boyfriend who would be down to bang me incessantly and do dirty things to me that I couldn't write home about. My first sights were set on Adrian, the cute boy who lived next door, who towered over me and would cuddle me while we watched George Lopez comedy specials when we missed our parents in San Diego. Pretty soon he was hooking up with other people and had no interest in me. I was desperate for anything. I nearly slept with a 28-year-old who was far from what I was attracted to. He asked me if he could come over to my dorm to have sex, and before I could say yes, pangs of guilt hit me. From all places, it came from the movie The Sister to the Traveling Pants, where the character Bridget lost her virginity to an older guy and hated it, and realized she was just lonely and it made her feel worse. I texted him not to come. I wanted to get a boyfriend, not an awkward hookup I would regret, so, for the time being, I gave up searching. Winter break came around and I headed home. I was riding high on a semester-long mania that had me crashing mentally but thriving socially. Lo and behold, the new college confidence I had attracted boys, and I began to date while I was home. I would kiss one, date another, and then dump him for his friend. I felt unstoppable. However, after spending the spring semester in a deep depressive state and not liking the school I attended, I stopped going to classes and decided to withdraw and go home to San Diego. I was back home as only fragments of myself, lonely, depressed, yet still wanting companionship. Once while out with a friend, we ran into an old acquaintance of his named Jarrett. Jovial, charming, and redheaded, I was excited to make a new friend. After a rapid and intense friendship began, he decided that it was time to introduce me to his friend who he felt would like me. I was coaxed into meeting his friend at Lestat's. I was so desperate that I wore a daring cleavage-bearing dress that threatened to show nipple at any point. I was going to experiment with different methods of getting a boyfriend, and maybe this one would work. I showed up and met Jarrett. He walked me over to the table and sat me across from Martin. I was immediately struck by his hair. It was short and a very platinum blonde. It looked like corn silk, and I was tempted to touch it. His eyes were a piercing green and set behind wire-rimmed glasses that made my stomach knot. His skin was glaringly pale and had a glow. It was radiant, almost like the moon lighting up the sky. He was exotically British. I was fascinated by the contrast of our different physical traits. I was smitten. We began a whirlwind romance. I only knew him for 2 weeks before he asked me to be his girlfriend. After saying yes, we walked hand in hand while I beamed next to his 6'5" slender frame. I finally had a boyfriend. I sweetly called him Ghost Boy, at his request. It wasn't until we dated for nearly 3 months that he finally revealed to me that I wasn't even a subject of awareness to his family. That should have been a warning sign. It would have been the smart thing to do to end it after seeing that red flag. Instead, I torched that sucker and decided to move forward. Once it was publicized that the random brown girl he had brought around was his girlfriend, I was invited to Christmas dinner, which strangely took place at noon. The dinner was dry and bland, but it didn't matter. I was finally meeting its prodigious grandmother. The light of his life, she was adored in all 90 pounds of her shriveled English glory. Making the most pleasant conversation I could, I attempted to delight her with my twinkling humor and charming smile. To no avail. Instead, her eyes were focused on the food she clutched in her sinewy, blue-veined hands. She then asked about my family and where they were from. I had a feeling that saying East Los Angeles wasn't the kind of answer she was really looking for. So I said how my mother's family is from Guadalajara. As I was saying that, my mom has an inconceivable 200-plus cousins with dried biscuit caking her tongue, and while looking me in the eye, she said, "Ah, yes, that's because of all the inbreeding." I felt like I had been punched in the gut, and when I needed it the most, all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. I looked down at my plate. I was too shocked to say anything. Images danced in my head of diving over the table and shaking her small frame while yelling. She was from England, and I'm pretty sure that's where inbreeding began. They weren't known for their diverse and rich gene pool as evidenced by how their royalty looked. Instead, my heroic boyfriend sat there, mischief dancing in his eyes and a gleeful smirk plastered on his face. Martin was dying to laugh. It wasn't a laugh of embarrassment for his grandmother's blinding assumption. It was a laugh at my expense. My discomfort and shame was as difficult to swallow as their dry turkey. I would go on to see that woman time and time again. Each instance stung. Her smile with her yellow dentures, too big for her mouth, looked more like a smirk. She would tell her grandson that it was the way of my people to get pregnant so I could trap him for the rest of his life. She may have been a doting and loving grandmother, but she made it clear that my heritage and the color of my skin would always be a detriment to her prized grandson. But I wasn't dating her. I was dating Martin. Echoing instances of racism were dropped here and there from him, small biting remarks sprinkled on being brown, small tidbits on how I didn't stack up mentally to him, the thriving anthropology major. God knows an undergrad degree from UCSD makes you the pinnacle of culture and knowledge after all. Tiny stabs here and there to keep me in my place. I don't know why I stayed. Maybe it was because the thought of being alone felt worse than being with him. The dire lack of self-esteem. His comments and taunts stuck like glue to my psyche but left me unable to call it quits. Our relationship became tumultuous and emotionally abusive. I was subject to his criticism and mockery, but on the days things were good, they were really good. I felt loved, and as though I was the apple of his eye. It was enough to make your head spin like a top. Our time together felt like a hellish roller coaster that I couldn't get off of. Time passed and we broke up, and then got back together again. He then told me he didn't love me anymore and wasn't attracted to me and broke up with me. Then we got back together again. Finally, we broke up a final time. And of course got back together again. We persisted despite all the red flags that were practically being shoved down our throats. After a year and a half, it came time for my birthday. In my family, it was a tradition to have a dinner at a restaurant in celebration of the person. So we ate with my family. After dinner, it was time to leave and go hang out with his friends. I no longer saw my friends anymore, and I came to vehemently dislike Jarrett and his crowd for their crude comments and antics. That night we went to In-N-Out, where strangely no one bought food, yet we loitered. Sitting at a table surrounded by his peers, they stewed about the loud patrons around us. Jarrett growled that the noisy and cheerful Filipino teenagers next to us were disgusting. Without skipping a beat, my beloved ghost boy exclaimed, "But are they more worthless than Mexicans?" The familiar stinging of being punched in the gut overtook me. His wide open laugh shook my core with each staccato, ha, ha, ha. My face bloomed crimson and was flushed with heat. I looked down into my lap in disbelief while he rattled in his chair with wretched laughter. His friends all mischievously looked at my reaction, hoping to see a fight. The room began to feel claustrophobic and I needed to get out. "Please take me home," I muttered to him. Everyone was on the verge of laughter while following us with their eyes as we left in and out. Once his car door closed, I nearly bellowed, "Worthless? Really? What the fuck?" Martin jerkily shifted the car into gear and sped to take me home while deflecting my questions. Yet, I was also being gaslit like a Christmas tree that had been doused in gasoline. I was furious. "I didn't know being Mexican was so important to you," he said. "Get over it. You don't understand humor that transcends race, Victoria," he retorted, as he raced around corners and sped through yellow lights. I was incredulous that he was shifting the blame onto me, as though I asked to be seen as worthless to him. I choked back tears. I felt utterly devoid of worth. If I was worthless, then why would he want me? If he doesn't want me, who else ever would? I felt confused. Yet I nearly shattered his car window as I slammed the door and raced into my house blind with rage. He would go on to call me his brown incest baby on multiple instances, and even continue to justify his comment on my birthday. What I don't think Ghost Boy understood was that as a Mexican-American woman, I can't transcend something that I innately am. I cannot transcend my brown hair and eyes, my year-round glowing tan, my rich heritage and culture, and to be quite frank, I would never want to. We continued to date for a while after that. We continued to break up and come back together. I was convinced no one else would want me. I thought only he would put up with me. It finally ended the day after he refused to dance with me at a quinceañera. He stood in the corner, angry to be there, and exclaimed how it was such a waste to spend money on a party like that, how foolish people were for dancing, how none of it meant anything. It was then in my life that I realized I couldn't be with someone who didn't value life like I did, who couldn't celebrate what it meant to be alive. So, I ended our relationship. I was done. This inbred, worthless, tall, awkward, fat Mexican would be just fine on her own. I left and I never went back.